Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the May OpenAlex webinar. We get a lot of questions on sustainability of OpenAlex, of open research infrastructure in general. How can we continue to make such a great resource free? And we thought it'd be a good opportunity to just talk about our plans, address some of the common questions we get. So today we're going to be talking entirely around sustainability. If you're attending live, please don't hesitate to put questions in the Q&A. There will be sort of a presentation from Jason on some of the common questions we've heard, and thank you to everyone in advance who submitted questions. We are going to address those, but there will be time in the Q&A to address other things that didn't come up. So, Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, my name is Jason Priem. I'm the co-founder and CEO of OpenAlex. And I want to underscore what Kyle said is I think this is this webinar is really born out of questions we've gotten, just like oodles and oodles of questions. I've been doing this for, as we'll talk about later, probably about 15 years and running OpenAlex, for about 15 years. And like, that is probably the number one question I get, to the point where it's kind of like almost a joke at conferences or whatever. Someone always raises their hand and be like, well, we got to bring up sustainability. And I think that's great. Like, it's super important. I'm glad we're talking about it. And so this is really driven by questions from the community. So I want to save lots of time for questions from the community, and Kyle has collected some as well. So speaking of what we're going to be doing, I've got my little outline here. I'm going to try and stick pretty closely to the times, but who knows how
Jason,
that
your
works.
slides aren't showing anymore.
Oh, that's not good. Hang on, let me try and reshare them. Thank you, Kyle. How about now?
Yes.
Terrific. Thank you for saying something, Kyle. And let's go backwards so you can see because I think that's pretty. All right. So now, yeah, I want to spend about 5 minutes just kind of introducing the topic, which we've already done. And really, I think when we talk about sustainability, I think actually like what's behind that is a question about risk, right? Because nothing lasts forever. We all know that. And so the question is really about what are the risks around what you're doing, and what are you doing to mitigate those risks? And this is a theme I'll return to a lot. Everything has risks, no matter what it is that you're using, whether it's, Lehman Brothers, they're too big to fail, or, the United States of America, their credit rating could never be downgraded, or whatever it is that you're doing, right? Like, everything has risks associated with it. And whether it's something relatively small like OpenAlex or relatively huge like the United States of America, whatever, we always want to be looking at risk and then think about mitigation. So that's how I really want to structure this discussion, not around like, how can you be absolutely sure that OpenAlex will always be exactly what you want it to be? Because like, obviously you can't. But the question is like, let's think hard about risk and about mitigation. That's certainly something that we, again, having been doing this for more than a decade, have spent a lot of our time thinking about. Then, like I said, mitigations, I kind of split those into three categories. Focus, that's one of the mitigations we can have, right? It's like we can make sure we're focused on the thing that we're actually trying to do, and we really like hold on to that thing. Diversification, which is really the opposite of focus, right? So focus, say laser focus on one thing. Diversification is, okay, well, how can we make sure, just in the same way that if your investment strategy or whatever, right? They say diversify, so if something goes wrong, you've got a backup plan. And then openness, which I'm going to argue is a lot of times people think about openness as part of a risk factor, but I think it's actually the other way around. I think open access is a mitigation to a lot of the risks that we associate with scholarly infrastructure or anything. And then I want to spend a good chunk of time on specific cases. These are really like questions that we've gotten like hundreds upon hundreds of time. I just want to kind of go, let's just talk about those specifically in detail, like what are the kind of like questions people have. And then, yeah, I saved 20 minutes for Q&A because we've gotten lots of Q's, so we want to give lots of A. So without any further ado, I'm actually keeping track on my like clock here of like how much time I'm taking these, because I am known to go way over time. So yeah, let's talk about risks. So like I said, I want to talk about risk and open. And like I said, we get so many questions about how can we make sure you guys can be persistent? And that's a great question. And I think I think a lot of folks who have been in this game for a while can remember lots of open organizations that started off open. Everyone loved them, they were darling, and then something happened. So the bad outcomes, as I mentioned, are basically, I think, kind of separated into two categories, either getting worse or going away. So we all loved it, it was a darling, but then, so an example might be Mendeley. Mendeley was a real open science darling for a long time. They were always a for-profit company. They always, I think people know startups. obviously acquisition was always a real big possibility for them, if not the goal. Um, but when they got acquired by Mendeley, there was such a like outrage from the community, like almost a sense of betrayal. Like a lot of people, there was a trending hashtag I remember called Mendelete. Everyone was like, delete your Mendeley. It's like such a betrayal. How dare they do this, you know? And so people's feeling was, okay, this got worse. We liked it before, something happened and it got way worse. Now, whether or not like they deserve that program, I think is a different question. But that is one of the things that people you almost it's almost like a very minimal kind of like trauma. You know, it gets seared in your brain, like this thing got worse, right? Or just going away. And there's lots of examples of open things that people really like and then just like kind of disappeared. So Microsoft Academic Graph is a classic example where people love this, they built on it, and it disappeared and it caused people lots of problems. And in fact, we're going to return to that one because that is why we built OpenAlex, is because we were using it, caused us lots of problems. And we said, okay, well, we need to take this thing over and keep it going. So people have this, you know, they know about these when it comes to open. But I think what people sort of forget about is that this is not by any means like limited to open. And I think what's weird is that sometimes when people, because they have been burned by open, and I think because people who do open spend so much time talking about um, persistence, talking about sustainability, it invites more of these questions and can become this feeling where it's like when you're talking to a kid, you know, and you're like, he's like, why? And you're like, well, because of that. Yeah, why? And you just get this chain of like endless why? And in the case of I think nonprofit infrastructure, it's what if you had this happens? Okay, yeah, but what about this? Oh, but what about this? About what this? I have never heard anyone from a for-profit company like answer that ladder of questions. That almost never happens, and no, almost never anybody asks them. And I think that's just because, like I said, I think we kind of get used to that because the open infrastructure are devoting so much to actually talking about it, it invites more and more and more questions. And so I think we can get these kind of perverse situations where it's like, I always think of the green energy example where, you know, you want to put in a solar farm and you have so much like, you know, a lot of times pushback from communities. Well, you know, solar, it pollutes in its own way. Some of those, you know, materials are not very safe. And those are all like fair points. And it's good that the solar folks are trying to address that. But it's like, where were you when they put the coal power plant in? Like, why are we not asking the coal people, you know? And I think we get the same kind of situation. It's like the people who care about it, they attract more questions, and it becomes this weird spiral of like, how can you prove that you're absolutely safe? So why I put all this in the preambles because I want us to think about risk of not just open infrastructure, but of closed infrastructure. And I always think like the kind of classic example of that is the Google graveyard. You know, if you look for a Google graveyard, someone started a site that was just all of the projects that Google has put out there. They were free, people loved them, and Google just axed them, right? And this is super relevant. Google Reader, I think, is probably the most beloved one on that pile. Google Wave, just there's literally hundreds. And I think that's super relevant for us because there's a lot of for-profit toll access infrastructure that just for one reason or another just goes away, gets discontinued. And I think we want to be thinking, hey, like these are all risks from the open world, they're risks from the for-profit world too. Um, and then finally, I just wanted to kind of classify the risk type just to keep in mind, you know, as we go. I kind of split them into we change, but there's also ones that the world changes. And so people say, hey, we think you're doing a good job now. But what if your leadership changes? What if this? Great questions. But then there's also what if the world changes? This is this. So just kind of keeping in mind, like I kind of structure them that way a little bit. Um, and then the last thing, which I didn't write down here, is I actually really what I love about the sustainability question is it really presupposes that what we're doing is useful, which I love to hear. That's great. It's just like, what happens if you go away? Whoa, you care if we go away? Thank you. That's awesome, you know? Because I think that's something that's really so I always like to keep that in mind. Like, number one, you know, I think what we're doing is useful. I'm glad people do, but I don't want to like sound hubristic about like, oh, you know, the world will be safe because we'll always be here. Like we're a small part of a lot of things that are happening, and I'm glad people care about this and we're trying to address it. But I don't want to like get a big head and think this is the be all end all. And similarly, I don't want to say we've got sustainability figured out. You know, I think that's the hubristic folly that like brings down the wrath of the gods. We have been doing this for, I believe, like I said, we incorporated in 2012. So that's 10, 13 years, so almost 15 years. So yeah, obviously, like we have been doing that for that long. But I really don't want to sit here and say, well, I've got the sustainability nut cracked, you know, like we're never going to go away. Like I think you got to stay hungry, no matter what you're doing, and that's what I think that's what we've tried to do, and that's what we're going to keep doing. So like I said, I don't know if we got to figure out, but I do think we have put a lot of thought into it. And I want to share that thought with you. Okay, much preambles. That aside. I'm actually kind of on track, which I'm very happy about for my time. I've never done this with the time before. It's really interesting. Okay, mitigations. Wait, no, risks, starting with risks, then mitigations. So I've split these into three categories: focus, diversification, and openness. And as I mentioned, focus and diversification are really opposites, but I think it's that tension that allows us to kind of stay. I think you have to implement both sides of that tension. You have to say, okay, we are going to stay very focused on what it is that we do so that we don't drift into other things. That idea of mission drift or mission creep is something I think a lot of people rightly are concerned about. But then in the service of that mission, we need to have a lot of diversification. So in the case of like managing a stock portfolio, right? Like you have a really clear mission. You're trying to make a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time. Um, but you want to diversify your portfolio as much as you can in service of that mission. So that's what we're trying to do. So we're going to start with focus. I'm going to talk about, we do have like a lot of legal structures in place to make sure we stay focused on our mission. And we have a great leadership team to help us do that. Then I'm going to move on to diversification. I think there's three big areas about that. Diversified revenue. Revenue is, of course, the main thing people are concerned about, talk about sustainability. Hosting, which is basically just like making like our actual machine that is what we do keep working. Um, and a home is kind of a new one, but it's something that people have really become very interested in since the election of the like current U.S. president. And that's, do you have exposure to risks that come from being an American company? And then finally, openness, as I mentioned, I think openness isn't, from my perspective, the affliction when it comes to sustainability. Openness is the cure. Openness makes you much more sustainable than you would be if you're a closed company. And I'll talk about that from the lens of data, through the lens of data and code. So let's dive on in. First of all, let's talk about focus. We've got 5 minutes to do that. Hang on, I gotta clear my thing. Um, so you can actually, we're a US registered 501(c)(3) nonprofit, which is different from, it can get boring to get into the legal details, but just a very quick primer on it, because I had to learn all this when we set this thing up. I was doing my PhD. This came out of my dissertation, this whole company, and my co-founder Heather was doing her postdoc. We were just full on academics. We didn't know anything about this stuff. So we had a lot of meetings with lawyers and stuff like that. And there's kind of three ways you can do this if you want to be an organization. You can do it sort of as part of a university, and that's actually how we started. And there's a lot of organizations that do that. So like, I believe BASE, Bielefeld, is associated with the Bielefeld University Library. So it's like a university project. Some of the stuff that Cameron did, that has changed now, but the COKI, Curtin Open Knowledge Institute, I think that is not in the same relationship with Curtin University as it used to be, but for a while it was just part of Curtin University. So you basically kind of have this like umbrella that's kind of guiding you. The other way you can do it is with a fiscal sponsor. So there's an organization and they basically provide the umbrella of like the management services. And as far as the government is concerned, they're like you and you're a division of them. And then finally, the hardest one, but the one that's the most flexibility, and I would argue the most robust, is a standalone organization, a standalone company. So that's what we are. We did that for a number of reasons, but one of the biggest one is because we think it has great implications for sustainability. Because we're not beholden to any other organization. Leadership changes at some organization don't affect there's no other organizations. Like it's just us and our mission, and we have complete autonomy and control within that. So we're not swayed by any university policy or fiscal sponsor policy or anything like that. We're registered in the state of North Carolina because that's where I was going to school. We're a 501(c)(3), which is important because there are a number of different types of nonprofits in the United States by American law. The 501(c)(3) has to be focused on a mission. The incorporation is with, like I said, the state of North Carolina as a company, and the 501(c)(3) is with the IRS, and that basically says you have to keep doing your mission or you lose that. The cool thing is that this isn't a project of Jason Priem or Kyle Demis or anybody else. Like it's a corporation, so it just is its own legal entity, and it's run by the board of directors. So people often say, do you have like, who's in charge? And the people who are in charge are these four people. And as you can see, one of the four people is me. Heather Joseph, if you've spent any time at all in the open science space, like she is, I would say, one of like, if not the like luminary in the space, like she's the head of Spark. has been doing this for decades and is really just like as big a champion for open as exists in the world and has a track record that's absolutely impeccable. Um, Ethan White is a scientist. He used to run the carpentry. So if you know about data carpentry, software carpentry, he used to have a leadership role in that. And he's a scientist. He works at the University of Florida. He's like one of our users. He's a researcher. And again, obsessed with open, always has been. Joanna McIntyre was, I believe she founded and certainly ran for many, many years, Europe PMC, which is an amazing effort to basically uh, like really substantially improve the American PMC. Um, and me like and same thing, I've been doing this for decades, like, and I guess you can decide what you want about my track record, but I have been obsessed about open science for like my whole career, more than 15 years. So the reason I mention all this is because these are the people who make the decisions. So our charter says everything you do have to be in the service of open science. Like that's what you do, and if you don't do that, you're legally liable. Like we on the board are legally liable for that, so we actually have to do that. So if we say, okay, we're just going to start like charging millions of dollars and like get rich, first of all, like we can't get rich because we don't get paid. The board doesn't get paid. And second of all, we're in violation of our charter. Like we're legally not allowed to do that. And the board does change. Heather and Ethan have been on the board since almost the beginning. Joanna is actually just starting. Um, and so the board gets elected by the board, and that's how we kind of like create some kind of a continuity around the decision making that happens. Um, so yeah, and I'll probably get into that a little bit more. But if any decisions were like any decisions get made about the company has to go through the board, and I think that's really important. We also have a board of advisors, like DOAJ. We actually stole DOAJ's idea there, and their like approach. The board of advisors is amazing. It's about a dozen people from the community. They don't have legal power. In other words, they can't like say yes or no to a deal. So I always think it's good to kind of say, hey, where's the buck stop? The buck stop with these four people. That's my boss. That's running the company. Okay, so I talked about focus. So we're very, very focused on open science. Like our charter makes us do that, our board makes us do that. That's our focus. That's what we're obsessed with. Um, I was gonna, yeah. So the other side of that is diversification. So we know what we want. We know what we're supposed to be doing. That's really, really important. Then the question is, how do we make sure that when weird stuff happens, we've got fallbacks? So I want to talk a little bit about the diversification now. So revenue, as I said, is always kind of the big one. And I want to maybe get into that more in the Q&A because I bet people have a lot of specific questions. But I just want to break it down that basically there's like two sources of revenue for us. And those sources of revenue are grants and earned revenue. And we aim to be around 50-50 for those. It changes depending on how many grants we're getting, I think generally it's maybe 50-50, maybe it's sometimes more on the grant side, like 60 or 70%, sometimes a little bit more on the revenue, but 50-50 is the general like goal. You can go to O Grants, Open Grants. This is an awesome project that was actually from our board member, Ethan White. Every grant that we've ever submitted, every grant we've ever got, all of the um, interim reports on the grant, all of the sum up, everything about all of our grants is all open and published. And not that many organizations do that, which I think is a real shame. We're really trying to like encourage people to do that because, if we're open, we're open. So you can see the kind of grants we write, the kind of grants we get. We're currently funded by the Arcadia Fund. That's a 5-year grant that we're currently on year 2 of. And we're funded by the Navigation Fund. That's a 2-year grant that we're on year 1 of. And then we have, like I said, earned revenue. We have 3 sources of earned revenue. We have kind of 3 products. One of them is called Unsub, one of them is called Unpaywall, and then one's called OpenAlex. OpenAlex is where a lot of our focus is right now and where a lot of our growth is coming. The other two, the revenue is relatively stable. Unsub is on the ballpark of like $200,000-300,000 a year. Unpaywall is in the ballpark of like 900 a million a year. And OpenAlex is growing very quickly. And these are all annual contracts. The great thing about those is that they're very reliable. So they call it churn. The number of people who kind of cancel, cancel out and stop doing like Unpaywall in particular is just like minuscule. Like people love the system, it works great. And the reason I mention all that is like these are pretty reliable. So we've got, like I said, you can look up all the numbers and stuff. It's a $7.5 million grant from Arcadia. We've got another 3.5 years on that. We've got really reliable revenue streams from Unpaywall, from Unsub, and the OpenAlex revenue is growing really well. So specifically, this is our ARR, annual recurring revenue. And as you see, it kind of goes from 0 in 2023 to this is fairly up to date. And yeah, we're creeping up on 800 grand, which is great. And the nice thing is you can see there's a really like solid progression in that number. And that's something we work really hard from. And if it sounds like I'm talking a little bit like a business chap, that's because we really like that's how we see this. Like we really appreciate the all the support, millions of dollars we've gotten support from philanthropic organizations. It's amazing, but that's not what we're built on. We always look at that as um, the POSI principles, which I should have a slide on, and I don't. Principles for Open Scholarly Infrastructure, which is a terrific document. Really highly recommend folks take a look at that if you're interested in sustainable scholarly infrastructure. One of the principles, and we are big believers in that. That's all stuff we've been preaching for a long time, and I think we're like the number 3 signatory to it. Um, One of their principles is, like grant funding should be used for projects, not for ongoing revenue. And we really believe in that. That's totally our approach. And that's why we always try and use this as almost as like kind of VC funding. We're going to use this as a runway to launch some kind of a sustainable business model. Because like it or not, that's probably the most sustainable approach to keeping an organization alive in the world, right? Is just sell something that people actually want that solves a real problem for people. And that's just like a huge focus, a huge obsession for us. And like I said, I think we've been doing a pretty good job of that. Unpaywall has been self-sustaining for probably almost 10 years now, like 9 years. And I think it's a pretty good approach. So that's our revenue. Hosting is one, again, we've gotten more questions from recently, like what happens if you lose servers, what happens if servers get shut down, stuff like that. We're hosted on AWS right now. That's all cloud-based. What happens if AWS breaks is the entire internet goes down because like 50% of the internet is hosted on AWS. And they do a great job. That's all it's all offsite, it's all like redundant, it's all heavily backed up. So all that data is like quite safe. And the great thing about that too is that if we ever decide, hey, we don't want to be hosting that, that's hosted on American servers, and there's pros and cons to that. But if we ever decide, hey, we shouldn't be hosted on American servers, it should be hosted somewhere else, it's super easy for us to move that because we already have it all set up to be running in the cloud. And I think that's really powerful. And then finally, like I said, this is one that we've heard more recently, and that is, what happens if the regulatory environment in the United States or some other reason it doesn't work to be an American company anymore for you. And then we just move. I mean, there's nothing like makes us happy position in the United States. We actually have staff all over. We're an international company that we have staff all over the world, and in particular, because one of our co-founders is Canadian, we actually are registered in Canada as well. This is our Canadian business registration. So we actually have like a version. Impact Story is our original name that we incorporate under. And so if we needed to move the entire company to Canada, that's actually super easy. Kyle's in Canada. We don't actually have to do anything. All we need to do is just move all the operations to be managed under that Canadian entity. And since it's all cloud hosted, it's not like we have physical data on a physical server that would be difficult to move. I mean, it is on physical servers in Virginia, in AWS farms and stuff like that, but moving that to Canada or to Europe would be like a piece of pie. And then if for whatever reason Canada doesn't work, of course we could incorporate somewhere else. I'm in Paris right now, like we can do stuff like that. But the nice thing is we're very mobile, as an organization, very mobile. We're not tied to any like physical infrastructure anywhere. Nor particularly tied to the United States in that, like I said, we are a 501(c)(3). We're not funded by the American government. So if the American government started to say, hey, we're not going to fund you guys anymore, cool, like that's fine. We had a $300,000 grant from NSF like 12 years ago, but that's the last money we ever got from the US. All right. And then finally, talking about mitigations, I want to talk about openness. Because like I said, I think people kind of see this as, oh, it makes it tougher. I think it makes it so much easier. And there's 2 areas where it's true, data and code. I'm going to start with the data. So I want to make the point that our data actually is open, which I think most people know at this point. So if you want to download our entire data set, you can do that on AWS. It will cost you $0. We've got some nice sponsorship from AWS. Big kudos to them. I want to like particularly point out this CC0. That means that there's no rights reserved. It's in the public domain. And the cool thing about that is unlike like what you might think of as like a traditional Creative Commons license, is there's no take backsies on that. Like when we commit it to the public domain, it's technically not a license, it's a declaration, which means we don't own the data. We literally cannot take, no one can take that back, that data anymore. It's in the public domain. in perpetuity, and that's just the deal. Which I think is pretty cool. It's a good kind of, I feel like, guarantee that like that data is always going to be out in the open. Now it's hosted on Amazon right now. A lot of people have downloaded this, as you might imagine, and there are a lot of mirrors of this that exist on private and university servers all over the world. But often people say, well, what if I can't get at the data? And that's why we also have this archived on Zenodo, and that's hosted by CERN, and they've got zillions of backups, and I don't know, it's underground in the Alps or whatever. I'm pretty sure it's safe. So I think that we've got like a really nice, I think, set of fallbacks to make sure that data stays open. And then the code, so that's if we just all disappear, right? Like someone snaps their fingers and we're gone. All that data is still there and no one can take it back. It's a public domain forever. But if you want to keep running OpenAlex, of course, you're gonna need the code. And here's the same drill. So all of our code is open on GitHub. You can go to GitHub/our-research and you can see it all and you can run it all for yourself. It's got comments, etc. And then what happens if GitHub goes away or if we take it off GitHub? This is another great example of someone who's doing this preservation work. So this is Software Heritage, fantastic organization, and they are committed to long-term preservation of software. And again, this one is mirrored in various places, so it's like it's got a really high degree of redundancy for preservation purposes. And I like to point these two things out, but I think sometimes people who don't work in open source or haven't created stuff with open source, people get it, but they don't like get it. And so I always like to try and give the example of what happened when Microsoft Academic Graph went away. And this was a resource that thousands of people really counted on all over the world, including us. And they announced that they were going away. They gave, I don't remember, like 6 months of warning or something like that. Like no, like I mean, like huge kudos to them. You know, they did amazing work, and their code was not open, but the data was open. And so me and Heather, like the two of us, and only two of us, uh, basically re-implemented from scratch everything that they were doing. We started with their data, which was the most, by far the most important thing. And then once you got the data, you can kind of figure out from the code, figure out the code you need to write to keep it going. And we kept it going. OpenAlex is now used by most of the people who use Microsoft Academic Graph before, plus millions of other people all over the world. And it's a really, for me, it really drove home this idea of like, if the data is open and it's valuable, you really can't make it go away. It's not, the whole thing isn't disappearing. Now, if it's valueless, of course, no one's going to re-implement it. But if it's valueless, why are we even worrying about sustainability in the first place? Who cares, right? But if it's valuable, there's really good incentive for a couple of interested people to re-implement the thing. Now, that was with no source code. All of our source code is open. So that makes it that much easier for it to be re-implemented by somebody who cares. And I can tell you that like just in the last couple of years, advances in AI with AI coding agents have got to the point where you do not need a lot of coding skills and a lot of coding hours to make really amazing things happen if you have the code base. Because it used to be, it took a long time to figure out how it was working and stuff like that. And now you just like, I do this all the time. You just plug it in my IDE and ask it questions and it's writing code in no time, even before I understand the thing. So it's never been a better time to say, hey, if the code's open, data is open, this thing is going to be around, as long as someone wants it to be around. All right, so that is kind of the framework. And then I also wanted to then take a couple minutes to address, and we are right on time actually, which is pretty awesome. I wanted to take a couple minutes to address some of the cases that we hear the most from folks. So I'm going to hit these and then we're going to take another 20 minutes just for folks to like maybe try and poke holes in like what I said, or maybe they got other questions or something like that. I'm going to like, my throat's getting a little sore, and then we're going to go through this one at a time. Give me 1 second, please. All right, so the first one is the one that people are mostly thinking of when they say sustainability. And that's what happens if you go broke. If you can't make no more money, right? Like what do you do? And I think, like I said, it's kind of addressed it a little bit already. Um, but I can tell you that for me, the most important, and I kind of already, I said like the number one approach to that is we make sure we don't go broke. So we have a really diverse revenue stream. We have two funders right now. We've got some like really exciting grants in with other funders that may pan out, may not, but we always try and have like multiple funders going. We have a great track record for those. Like, I don't know exactly what our batting average is for like grants, but man, it's like well over 500. I'm really like very thankful to the funders who have like been super, super like enthusiastic about that. We've had a lot of people come to us and say, hey, look, if you're ever in really big trouble, like let us know. Like, you know, we'll move some stuff around, we'll support you guys. which is great. We work really hard for earned revenue. As I mentioned, we have really sustainable sources of earned revenue that have been very solid over the years. So that's kind of the first line of defense. I would rather just make more money and not go broke. But I can also say, we run this thing in such a way that we don't need a lot of money to make it go. Um, and and I think a big part of there's some startup advice that I love, which is that startups don't really end because of a disaster. They end because like people stop working on them. Like they just give up. And I can say that the leadership behind this startup, which is currently me, has been for a decade, is not giving up on this. And there was times early on in this project where my salary was $20,000 a year, and I was paying for servers out of my personal like savings account because we had no money. And that was a long time ago, and thankfully we have a much more kind of professional organization now or whatever. But one reason I share a story is because there's a lot of determination to make this thing work. And we've gotten pretty good over the years at learning how to live within our means. And so we're in a really big growth spurt right now, which is great. But if things happen and there's no money, then we know how to get smaller and make do with less. And so I think there you just kind of got to look at the history. We've made it through boom times and bust times, and I think we're pretty good at not going broke. I think again the question is always for the for-profit folks too: what happens if you go broke, right? I don't know. Everybody's out here hustling, and we're all trying to make the thing work. Um, I think there's a great principle. I forget the name, Linda principle. I want to say something like that. It's not Linda, but something like that, where like the if you want to guess how long something's going to last, best guess is how long it has already lasted. Right. So I think if you wanted to take a bet on how long our research would be around, I guess the line, the over under would be 13 years. How much longer we got in us, and hopefully we'll keep we'll keep adding to that. But we're not going away next year. We actually have some durability with this. The other one that people are often thinking about, and I'm happy to talk about specific financial questions. It's always just like I said, I don't want to like sugarcoat it because like I said, we're all out here hustling. Like you got to kind of just like look at the record, and any company could go broke. Um, the other one I think is more unique to us though is about what happens if you get bought. And there, I think, like I said, people, it's really, I see in people's eyes, it's like this almost trauma thing where it's like, I believed in companies that got bought, like, I don't want to get betrayed again that way, and I really get that. I super get that. Um, I think I kind of addressed some of that already, like just our board, which has been around for like I said, more than a decade, with most of the same people have been around for the next decade. These people are not selling out to I'm trying not to mention any by names, but any evil company that you can think of, they're not selling out. That's not happening. Um, as a nonprofit, it's actually quite difficult. Most of the people that like sell out to a company, they generally are structured as a for-profit. So there's equity in the company and they're selling the company, which has like a value, like a market value, right? Like an equity. There's shares. Someone owns it. It's a thing that is owned. The kind of cool thing, the awesome thing actually about a nonprofit is there isn't equity in the company. It's not owned by anyone. So how much value OpenAlex has, if you imagine it had a market value, there's no one who owns that thing. I don't own it. The board doesn't own it. Nobody does. And so if we were to sell it to, let's say, whoever, pick your well-funded, for-profit company, if they wanted to offer us 10 million, hundreds, $1 billion for it, where does that $1 billion go? The only place it's legally allowed to go is in the bank account of a bank owned by Impact Story, which is our legal name, a bank of our research. That's the only thing it's allowed to do. So it's not like a situation where, in the case of Mendeley or whoever, like again, not throwing shit on those guys, but like they got paid. Like the founders of Mendeley, like made personally millions of dollars from those deals. And again, that's what they set out to do. And I think everyone should have known that's what they set out to do. And so not throwing shade on them at all. But I'm saying it's a different story with a nonprofit. And it's actually really hard to find examples, although there are some, it's hard to find examples of independent nonprofits, not owned by some other organization, but independent nonprofits that sold to a for-profit. Because the only reason they're allowed to do that is they think the for-profit can do a better job of their mission. And I so far see no indication that a for-profit can do a better job of the mission that we're doing. And no one on the board sees that. So I think it's extremely unlikely we get bought. We're looking into, and we've talked a lot with Cameron Island again, is like a big proponent of these kind of things, like clauses that you can put in the articles that say you're not allowed to sell and stuff like that. It's interesting. We spent a lot of time talking to lawyers about it and stuff, and it's surprising how few of these are actually in operation. And there's just very little testing of them. Like people haven't really done them very much, mostly because, as I said, in the case of nonprofits, it's mostly just not needed. Like the nonprofit structure itself is just not very appealing as an acquisition target. Trump attacks. That's the one that we hear a lot just because, the political situation. And that takes a lot of forms. I think overall it's kind of a vibe almost from people. You're just like, just I don't like the political situation. And I totally get that. Like, I think I covered that mostly already. Like, we're not funded by the United States government. We are subject to the laws of the United States government. If we decide we want to pull up and relocate in another country, we can do that if the United States government is getting in the way of our mission. And that's exactly what we do. For us, that's what we're all about. We're actually trying to like do the mission. The one I think small one is yeah, like we do have 501(c)(3) status, which could technically be revoked. There has been some talk of, for some people for some organizations that happening. It hasn't happened to my knowledge yet, but if it did happen, again, that's cool. Like we don't need to be an American company. We can be a company somewhere else. And all that would happen is we would need to pay taxes, which sucks, but isn't like a company destroying problem. Um, Become evil. So yeah, that's I think what happens if you guys gradually like decide you want to sell data or something like that. That's a really tough one because it's just kind of asking people to trust you. Like I think just look at like the record of our board and of me, who's been running the company from day one, and the board who's been in charge of the company from day one. And I guess you just gotta kind of decide if they're the kind of people that you think are going to become evil, or not. I do think it's funny to me again that the people asking that question are often people who are in like figure arrangements with companies that they regard as completely evil. So it's like I always think people are like, what if you become Elsevier? I mean, bro, you're doing business with people who have already become Elsevier. They are Elsevier. They're not going to become Elsevier. They started Elsevier. So like, I don't know. Like again, I think you just got to kind of like try and apply the same evaluation criteria to all of the companies that you're involved with or do business with or have exposure to, and try and think about which of the ones are the higher risk and the lower risk one. And I view us as a really low risk of becoming evil. Certainly something we think about a lot, and we try and put structures in place to keep ourselves on the side of the right. Making sure that all the data is CC0 is something that actually like a lot of organizations in the open space do not do. Making sure that all of the code is 100% open is something that a lot of organizations in the open space do not do. And I am a really strong advocate for all those organizations to do those two things. Because what I've found is that once you do those two things, uh, trying to slide into, well, we'll charge for some of the data. Sometimes we'll charge for the data. It becomes impossible because the data is all zero. Who's going to buy it? And the code's all open. So if you try and like squeeze people on it, they'll just run it themselves. So I think those two things really, that commitment really like provides a very like tangible fence around all of the fields of evil of selling data, and I'm proud that we do that. It's something I really encourage everybody to do. And I encourage everyone who cares about this, go look at the open infrastructure projects that you're involved with. Many of whom are incredibly awesome projects, and push them to say, all your data needs to be 0, all your code needs to be open. And those who are doing that, kudos to them. Um, this is a big one in open source, hit by bus. They call it the bus factor. So for open source projects, a lot of times, like if there's one person who's like the person, what happens if that person gets hit by bus, right? And um, they're not there. What happens to the project, right? And I think that's an important question. And I would say that's something we have definitely put some thought into. Um, it's probably one of the ones where compared to like a huge organization like Web of Science, something like that, like I mean, I would never wish for anybody to have a bus, but I think that it wouldn't affect the organization too desperately, right? I think it would probably affect us a lot more because we're a small organization. I think we can't lose people easily. I will say we've gone through, like a lot of people. So of the people that we started with, of the staff that we started with, um, I'm the only person who's still here. And so I think what that tells you is that we do have a culture. We have created a culture that can withstand staff turnover. Um, can it withstand like Jason Priem turnover? Like I'm quite convinced that it can. Like there's nothing that I do that's magic. Like the other guy here who's on this webinar can easily lead this company. I can definitely assure people, like for sure, I've worked with Kyle for year, 2 years now, something like that. And he can definitely do what I do, like no question. And he'd be amazing at it. So I think we've got a pretty good like solid thing there. The fact is just like if the smaller the company is, the more fewer people need to be standing riding on the same plane or whatever for like the thing to change. And that's a reality, and I don't want to sugarcoat that. But I would say it's not just like it's definitely not like one person's show. We are like actually kind of a grown-up organization that can turn staff over. Um, what happens if we get bored? I don't hear that very much, but I'm surprised people aren't more curious about it, like because that happens for open source projects. I think it's pretty much covered by all the stuff I already said. Like if what we're doing is valuable, someone can take it over for sure. And I will actually say this: it's Heather, my co-founder, who's like, love this. every bit as much as I did. Eventually, she said, "Hey, this isn't for me anymore." Bored is probably not the right word, but she wanted to do other projects and wanted to take some time off. She stepped down. And she, gave us and the community like I think a year, 9 months worth of warning. So we had plenty of time to set stuff up. If that ever were to happen, that's certainly what we would do too, and that's how it would go. We would make sure that there's a succession plan in place and stuff like that. I can tell you, I am not the tiniest bit bored by this. I find it more exciting than I ever did. Um, Trade war, that's something that's on people's like lips lately. Uh, what happens well, in a large sense, like what happens if there's like a huge like uh, economic warfare, like really big economics problem. That's always when I say like, wow, look at the for-profit guys on that. Their exposure is massive to that kind of stuff, right? Because at 20% or 80% or whatever crazy tariffs on $100,000 bill that you're paying is like real money. For us, like people mostly use us for free. And if they use us on our premium subscription, which we really appreciate if people tiny plug, like premium subscription gets you great priority support, as well as faster access to the data. But if you're spending, 10, 20, $30,000 on that, it's just not the same impact if there's a percentage increase on that. And if that did become an impediment for us, like some big like tariff issue, like I said, we don't have to be an American company, um, but so far, like I said, I don't think it has been a big issue. For us, given that, like I said, we're just not, what we do. And I think the whole point of what we're trying to do is saying this can be done for 1% of the money that's currently being done by the total access incumbents, less than 1%. It just doesn't have to be that expensive anymore. In the same way that, like, if you wanted to go get your photo taken in like 1890, whatever, it's really expensive. You go to a place, the guy's got the whole thing, and right, like now you just pick your phone, and do that thing, and no one says like, so anyways, we just want to bring the price of like of a universal library of scholarship down way, 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 way lower than it's ever been. And when you do that, all of a sudden your exposure to anything involving finance becomes way, way lower compared to some of the incumbents where what they do is really expensive. So they have this machine that you need to keep shoveling money into. And there's economic problems, then all of a sudden the shoveling money strategy becomes a lot less viable. And then finally, we do get some that are kind of like, I don't want to make fun of people. They seem a little far-fetched to me because it's like, what happened if like a climate emergency, societal collapse, stuff like that. And it's like I don't know, bro. Like how much, how much, how many, like what does your bomb shelter look like? How many gallons of water do you have? How many buckets of rice do you have? Like it's not like we will do our best to continue to provide people access to scholarly metadata. I actually think we're in a better place to do that, as I said, than the toll access folks, because that actually is open data. You can take all of what we're doing and put it on a hard drive and have it forever. I think that's great. But realistically, societal collapse is not one of the things that we are like forecasting for, or that we put a lot of effort into, because genuinely, like we're going to have bigger problems at that point. But I will say, I think we're a much better option for the world should society collapse than toll access ones that cost like an arm and a leg and need thousands of libraries all over the world to be paying six-figure subscriptions to support. Like actually, I think we'd do a lot better in that situation. So now I'm done. I only went 5 minutes over, and we have 15 minutes for questions.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Just a reminder to everyone who's attending, you have a Q&A, and so if you'd like to ask us specific questions, feel free to do it. Now's your time. I think I can also promote you to put yourself on the screen if you'd rather do that, but you just have to raise your hand. So let us know. In the meantime, I did get another question last night. I can go ahead and ask you, Jason. So it was very specific to, we have a lot of dependencies on metadata from different sources. What happens if publishers start closing their metadata? Can they
Mm-hmm.
start closing their metadata? What would happen to our systems? Or if something like PubMed Central went down, for instance?
Well, those are two, I think, two distinct questions. Um, the first one is trickier and I think more interesting. And yeah, like for sure, we have exposure to that. So it basically kind of comes down to you guys aggregate data about scholarly communications, and what if all that data went away? Well, then yeah, we wouldn't have much to aggregate, and it would be a really big problem. Um, I think for publishers, uh, they've for a long time been in the business of selling full text, and I think that the scholarly community, at some point said, yeah, we get this is a good business model for you guys, but this is not good for science. And 2 decades of advocacy later, more than 50% of the literature is open access, which is amazing. And I think that the scholarly community has done a great job of advocacy for open metadata as well. And the citation graph is the really big one there because that used to be super hard to get. And now it is like really, really well represented in Crossref. Not 100% coverage, but really, really strong. And that was basically just advocacy, people saying, hey, like we care about this. You're supposed to represent the scholarly community. Scholarly community is about actually sharing information, not hiding it, and we need you to do this. And that advocacy was really successful. So I think that to me, in the real world, like the more likely outcome is actually we get more and more scholarly metadata available. There's a lot of projects right now around getting scholarly funder metadata into Crossref. And I think there's some progress there about abstracts. I think there's some progress there. So I think the real world is more likely to have more scholarly metadata available rather than less. But I would certainly, yeah, like, and we have a lot of sources if we get in the metadata, which is nice too. So if one particular one of them doesn't work, we can get it somewhere else. But yeah, I definitely would say that is like something we keep a really close eye on, and we really encourage everybody who cares about this metadata being available to keep the pressure on, because otherwise it's really easy for all this stuff to become closed for sure. Um, as for PubMed Central, that one's an easier one. We just don't we cover PubMed Central. We have it as a data source. We don't have that many items that are only in PubMed Central because typically if they're in PubMed Central, they're also in a repository somewhere, an institutional repository. So if PubMed Central were to go away, it would not like affect our data source super hard. I think we would lose like definitely like single digits of like low single digits worth of like material. I am a huge supporter of PubMed Central, and I definitely encourage, we got to all like defend PubMed Central and stay on PubMed Central for sure. But I don't think that it would be a massive loss for the OpenAlex data set specifically.
Yeah, and while we were talking, Nace asked a similar question specifically with Crossref and DataCite. Obviously, any of our core data sources are going to have a bigger impact if they were to go away. But I'd say that Crossref and DataCite are being used by thousands of downstream users around the world. So it's not just us that will be impacted by that. That's something we got to protect and keep sustainable as well.
Yeah, Crossref especially, if that went away, like the entire DOI system would break. Everyone's links to every paper would go away. That would be a really significant disaster, like the scholarly equivalent of what happened if the power grid went down. Yeah, like we would be up a creek, like the world would be up a creek. So yeah, I think we got to pay like, and kudos to Crossref for having created an extremely sustainable organization. They've done a terrific job, and like I think again, they deserve like our immense support.
And in the second part of Nace's question, he asked if we've been working to directly establish relationships with publishers to ingest metadata from them independently, sort of separate from these. And I can speak to a bit of that. So we do have some publishers who reach out to us who want to figure out how to expose higher quality metadata than they currently have in other places because they start looking at OpenAlex and they say, oh, we don't have titles for some of these works, or oh, we put the wrong dates. In almost all of those situations, we try and convince them to fix it upstream with Crossref. Because usually they find out through that process that they could have been doing something better or sent higher quality metadata to Crossref and then it automatically gets into OpenAlex. I will say that we've had one big publisher who's come to us recently who wants to give a lot more data than they have, and they're setting up OAI PMH endpoints for all of their metadata. So I think we will see more and more publishers start to make their metadata open in other places. But as long as Crossref is there doing great work and they can easily submit metadata to Crossref, I think we're in a good spot there. But Jason, anything you want to add on that?
Other than yeah, that's just a good point in terms of like what if publishers try and take their metadata away. It is a pretty good point that like all of our interactions with publishers about metadata are, could we give you more data, metadata, please? Not we want to try to get rid of the metadata. Typically, the public, right, it's a way for them for people to find their content, right? And their authors, of course, want to be discovered, and so they want to try and make sure their authors are discovered. So yeah, that's a good point.
It's the only question that's come in so far. Are there any other questions people want to ask? Again, we put this together from the questions that we've been receiving from many people for a long time, so I guess that's a good sign that we've covered a lot of them. Um, but now's also a great opportunity if you have something specific to add. Okay, I mean, I think we can call it there, and we're always open to additional questions. So if you want to follow up with specific questions, don't hesitate. Support at ourresearch.org is the best way to do that. Um, but thank you, Jason,
And
for organizing. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, we'll be posting this webinar too, right? Where can people find that?
Yep, we'll be posting the webinar on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and search Our Research, you'll find all of our past webinar recordings as well as this one. And our website with the webinar sign up will also have links to each of them individually. So yeah, thanks again for everyone who attended. Jason, thank you for organizing all the thoughts around this and putting this together. I think this was really fantastic. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Kyle.